Greetings and well met, fellow traveler. Thank you for joining me on my discussion about gaming. This week we are going to talk about tabletop gaming etiquette. What do I mean when I say tabletop gaming etiquette? Well, quite frankly, the rules that everyone should follow when they're playing any sort of tabletop game, be it Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Star Trek, or what have you. Having good gaming etiquette allows a group to work together much more cohesively and in much greater harmony than when everyone is yelling at the top of their lungs so that their character can have the spotlight. It allows the dungeon master to hear what plans are being formulated, to react to them, and to help them carry through. And it allows the players to hear accurate and timely descriptions of what the dungeon master is putting out, which is superbly important. First off, we don't want to have players interrupting each other. This often occurs all the time, especially in situations that are not combat oriented. I find that with my group, players tend to do much better in a combat situation in terms of interrupting each other because there is an established order to how events occur. One person moves, and then based on initiative or what have you, the next person will move, and so forth and so forth. And typically our group, when we play, there's not so much of an issue with this. Where this breaks down is when there is not an established rank and file order of initiative, i.e. during periods of role-playing, which are strange to have in a role-playing game. So, for instance, you may have your group of people go to a tavern and try and talk to the innkeeper. And you may have one person who is in your group that is lawful good and will approach the innkeeper with an open and honest and frank question, such as, do you know where the evil enclave in the town is? You might have another character in your group that is, say, chaotic evil, and will threaten the bartender immediately, or lie to him, or do some sort of thing to subvert him. You may have a neutral character who is just willing to pay the bartender money in order to get information. So, with all these different approaches, they can create a lot of confusion when they happen at the same time, and it's impossible for a DM to accurately follow each of those along. In addition, when you're yelling and talking very loud, you can't really come up with a good strategy. Strategies are things that should be done before combat or any major event occurs, and we'll talk more about that in another episode. But when you have a group that, if you're trying to plan something out, and you're consistently yelling over each other and nobody is listening to one another, then your plans will never be fully understood by everyone or fully agreed upon. And when push comes to shove and the plan has to be put into action, you'll find, sadly, that there is nothing there to put. So, players shouldn't interrupt each other. First off, it's frankly rude. Secondly, it makes it so nobody feels like their player really gets a chance in the spotlight. And one of the great things about playing a role-playing game is that you get to assume that role. And while not everybody, of course, is going to play the boisterous fighter, or, someone who generally is considered the face of the group, everyone, when their turn comes to speak, they should be allowed to speak because it's their character doing what they would like. There are, of course, occasions when characters would interrupt each other, such as in-game reasons, but I find that oftentimes when interruptions occur, it's not so much the character interrupting another character, it's the player interrupting another player, because they are impatient, don't want to wait for that other player to finish. Doing that creates a feeling of discord in the group, and if the group can stamp that out, they will have far more effective battles, strategies, and game plans, and it'll really make playing overall a much more enjoyable experience, since everyone in the group will feel included in what is occurring. Secondly, never, ever interrupt the DM when he's speaking as the DM. Okay? This is a pretty cut and dry situation here. When DM, the Lord our God, is speaking, you should be quiet and listening to what's being said, taking it in, and making notes. Oftentimes when the Dungeon Master, Game Master, Storyteller, whatever the title that they go by is speaking, it's either A, to give a description of the area you are in, which is always extremely valuable, because if there's going to be a fight, you need to know what's at hand. Is there dust on the floor that you can throw in somebody's eye, or is it a rocky, barren floor and you'll have to find some other thing to do? Is it is it leveled or is it flat? Hearing the surrounding information is very important. Also, it gives you a sense of the flavor and the fantasy of whatever game it is that you're playing. And that's really why we play these games. It's not to collect gold that, well, it's not really real. It's to hear the story that evolves. And when you interrupt the Dungeon Master in his descriptions, then you miss out on a lot of the richness that the game entails. Secondly, it's just stupid. It's flat out dumb to do that, because first off, it's going to piss off the Dungeon Master, and while Dungeon Masters do their best to try and remain, if not neutral towards the party, a little bit on their side because they want their story to be told, if you do something that pisses off the DM enough, he's going to send something in your way that you're not going to like. It may not kill you, but you might lose all your items. You could fight a rust monster. Those suck. But, so you don't want to interrupt the DM. Also, he may be describing something that's occurring or an action that takes place in a cinematic way. And if you jump in and interrupt that, not only is it going to, again, ruin the flow and the fantasy of the entire scene that's being set up, but it's going to disrupt the description and possibly throw the DM off pace a little bit, and not in a good way, but in a way that's kind of messes with the story, and it's going to create havoc and confusion. A lot of times if I'm dungeon mastering and my players interrupt me, I won't repeat it. I'll give it to them once and I won't repeat it, because if they're doing something else, then they obviously weren't paying attention when whatever it was happened, or I won't repeat it. Also, I will continue talking, and I won't raise my voice, so I'll continue talking at a normal rate. And it's funny because you'll see one or two players really straining to listen, because they're like, oh crap, we're hearing a thump thump thump, is there a dragon approaching? And then the other players will be talking about how they're killing children, whatever player characters do. Some of them are pretty terrible. But, talking about stuff that's not important and shouldn't be interrupting the Dungeon Master. So, player characters, be aware of that. DMs, we don't take kindly to being interrupted. And neither do player characters, but DMs, especially in terms of a RPG scenario, have a lot of power to kind of punch back. But you shouldn't interrupt them, because you won't understand the concepts that are being thrown out. If it's a subtle thing like, you're trying to maneuver, political allies to help each other or to dissuade their union, you really got to pay attention to the subtle hints and clues that the Dungeon Master will give you, which Dungeon Masters love to give those out, by the way. They won't be sparing with them. If you ask, they'll give them to you, so don't worry about that. But you have to listen to them, because if we're talking and we've worked on this storyline and these characters for you, and we just get interrupted, it's very disheartening, very disheartening. And so, we'll throw you down a bottomless pit. We don't care. We'll kill you off and make another one just like you. So yeah. Third topic I want to talk about is don't hate the player, hate the game. A lot of times I've seen players get upset at each other in real life. We'll call it out of character, OOC. In real life, because of things that their player characters have done. And what's worse, as a DM, is people who are upset at each other in real life when they let that bleed into the game and their player characters start acting in ways that their player characters wouldn't be acting if they were on good terms with each other outside of the game. So, if someone's character does something stupid, or they have a bad die roll and it looks like they've done something stupid, don't get mad at the person, at the player. Your characters in character could be mad at each other, but if you have it where your outside lives are influencing the inside campaign, it's going to get very tense, because when you're playing a game and you don't have that separation of fiction and real life, you see these characters only in their most dire or greatest moments. So there's a lot of passion that you see in their lives, and you're playing in their lives. You don't see them during their downtime, typically when they're sleeping, when they're eating, taking a shower. Very few games revolve around that, unless you're talking about The Sims. But The Sims RPG, that would be a boring game. Actually, I'd probably play that. But copyright. Okay, so you typically don't see them during that time. So make sure that your player characters are separating their fact from fiction, if you will, because I've seen people start off as friends, and through the course of a campaign they end up hating each other in real life, and that's not what these games are about. So keep in mind that even if you're playing a game and you're doing really well in the game, and then another player, for whatever reason, screws over the party, and by the way, if you're that player, you better have a good in-character reason for doing that. And you better have talked about it with the DM before time, because if you pull that crap out of nowhere, that's going to piss off not only all of your players, but also the Dungeon Master, because y'all are working to tell a story. And sometimes you have to bend what your characters are willing to do in order to keep that cohesive. It's called gaming. But if their player character screws over your party, you can't hate them for that if they have done it in good faith playing their character. It'll be a setback for you, and it'll be unfortunate for the group, but it won't be, if it's done right, it won't be something that's done purposefully to upset people. And it's critically important that you separate your two realities here, or your fantasy and your actual reality. And sort of the fourth thing I want to touch on is just sort of general guidelines for life, but especially for gaming, that you should be prompt, prepared, and professional. So come on time or come early to your gaming sessions with all of your equipment, and be prepared to game. Be leveled up if you've done so beforehand. You know, because when you show up late to the game, you keep people waiting for you, and they want to start the game, they want to adventure and have a good time. But if you're 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour late, people are just going to be pissed off at you because they've blocked out this huge section of their day to come play this game, and you've maybe wasted, a quarter of it by being an hour and a half late or an hour late. So, don't do that. Pay your friends, and if not your friends, pay your players, your co-players, and your dungeon master the common decency to show up on time and to be prepared to game. And there's really no reason to not do that. If the time isn't working out for you, just let your group know. They might be able to work around it and move the time, or you might have to find another group. And if you're going to be late, call a dungeon master, let him know, because he might be able to come up with a reason why you're not in the first quarter of the game, and it won't have to suspend play or play your character. Because the DM will play your character if you're not there. And what happens when that DM plays that character? He'll try to be faithful to your character as he sees them. But, bad things can happen. And when I'm playing a character for an absent or tardy player, if somebody needs a potion of healing, hey, use mine. I've got extra. So, you need some gold to pay your tithe? Here you go. I don't need that. I took that off of some rich guy. So, be courteous, be on time. Those are kind of the four main things, and I think if people could follow those gaming etiquette rules, that the games would run a lot smoother. And just as a postscript to this, if you have in-house rules, make sure you follow them and don't complain about them. They're whatever the dungeon master sets. So when I'm DMing, I have a few. One of them is if you roll off the table, it's an automatic critical fail, and I get to decide what happens. That's a house rule that everybody knows about. And so when you do it, don't be surprised by it, and don't argue with it. DMs hate it when people argue about rules. Also, if we're in combat and combat's going too slow because people are talking way too much, I'll start counting down. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Your character loses their turn. They were just standing there talking. And typically when you do that, it trains your player characters to let them know how much time they actually have to act, and it helps them out. Now, I'm not saying that I would do that if they're describing something complex that they're doing, like if they're saying, or if they're asking a question, like if they're saying, can I jump over and grab the rope, and will that rope be long enough to swing me down to the deck of the ship? I wouldn't hold that time against them. Or if they're telling me like they want to throw a grenade and have it bounce off the castle wall and land on the other side of the courtyard, I also wouldn't hold that against them. But because even though you may have a good imagination, you do sometimes need clarification for how the actual world is working. But if they're just sort of there chatting, with other people, like their strategy in the middle of combat, no, that's not going to work. So, just kind of the in-house rules. Make sure you follow them, because the DM set them for a reason. They're not arbitrary. But yeah, so don't interrupt players. Don't ever interrupt the dungeon master. Don't hate the player, hate the game, and be prompt, professional, and prepared. Those are kind of my 4 cardinal rules, and I think if people were to follow that gaming etiquette, games would be much more successful. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, I would love to hear them. Please feel free to put them on. And if you like what you see, please click subscribe. And I'll be posting another video next week on a new topic. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. Thank you very much, and may the Force be with you always.